Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fielka. Today is May 31, 2023. We want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast. I'm probably wrong about everything. It's an honor and pleasure to be here with Ben Balcom. Is that the correct way to pronounce it, Ben?
Yeah, that works. I mean, I usually give it a pretty sharp A, but yeah, that's perfect.
No, you say it the way it should be said.
I mean, I say Ben Balcom, but
Balcom.
yeah.
Ben Balcom. Thank you. Where in the heck are you calling in from?
Yeah, I'm calling in from Milwaukee, Wisconsin today.
First question is, what is the best thing for a human being?
Oh, lovely question. I mean, I think the best thing for a human being is time, specifically free time. I mean, I guess I like thinking about not having to add that modification because, free is such a loaded word. And time is, integral, I think and it's just essential to human being and becoming. Free time is just a necessity given the constraints of our modern life under capitalism. So, I mean, I think expansive free time as a resource, if everyone had it, would be good for all.
Really good. I never get that, and I love it. I love the word free.
Yeah.
Emmett Grogan, the digger in San Francisco, said everything should be free. And that's a no-brainer. Duh. And then the other one is the flip. My favorite bumper sticker ever. The worst things in life are free.
That's nice.
What's your favorite form of information? How it comes into you?
I suppose as a real believer and advocate, believer in and advocate for poetry, I think that's maybe my favorite way to receive a kind of information. I mean, I think poetry sort of works against the idea of information or against the idea of fact or things like digestible or legible information. But I think as a form of information or signal, I think for me poetry is probably my favorite way to receive new types of knowledge and expression.
Mind-blowing, dude. That's amazing. I love to hear that. Why do you think humans collect or gather information?
I think it has to do with being storytellers, just the impulse to riff, to share anecdotes and stories. I think without stimulus and things to build memories on, we'd have really short, I don't know, we wouldn't have a great supply of stuff to draw from. So I think gathering information is just a way to think about telling stories to each other.
Do you think this need or want to collect information is more innate or more invented?
That's a good question. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think maybe it's somewhere between the two, or maybe I want to trouble that distinction between the kind of opposition of learned and inherited. I think there's so many ways and times that I've been tempted to, so many conversations that get kind of bound up in that sort of, well, it's either learned or innate. And maybe I always feel really kind of uneasy about that distinction.
Yeah.
I mean, I say that as someone who I don't actually have a great knack, I think, for information absorption. And sometimes when I feel like I have friends who I think can rattle off interesting factoids they absorbed from somewhere recently, and I always find myself thinking, wow, I don't know what to just to offer here. So as like someone who doesn't necessarily accumulate information in that way,
Yeah.
doesn't share information in that way, I kind of think it must be learned. Um, but yeah, I mean, again, I do think it's just something we kind of have to do. You know, we're gatherers, I think,
Yeah.
pretty essentially. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Do thoughts create emotions?
Yeah, and vice versa. You know,
Yeah.
emotions create thoughts, and again, maybe that's a tricky distinction in and of itself. Like, what's the boundary line between a thought and a feeling? Yeah, I think absolutely they do, and it happens the other way around. And
Yeah.
yeah, sometimes thoughts totally hinder emotion. I don't know. Yeah, there's a funny just circuit or relay between those two things, and
Yeah.
more.
Fill in the blank. I don't know what I think until I.
I don't know what I think until well, yeah, feel it.
Feel it.
I don't know what I think until I speak it out loud, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. Very interesting, because that's what McLuhan says. I don't know what I think until I say it. Joan Didion says, I don't know what I think until I write it. But
Mm,
I am amazed that people will say, I don't know what I think until I feel it. Because that's more what this whole series is about, is more like your hunch or
yeah,
your guess or your impulse.
yeah,
Because the questions are stupid when I say, is it this or that? I
yeah,
know it's both. And
yeah,
just because we invented the words emotions and thoughts doesn't mean they're so interconnected you can't separate them, but we think we can because we invented the words.
sure, sure, yeah,
Can humans think without language?
yeah, absolutely,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that's why abstraction and music are, abstraction in music, abstraction through music, abstraction and music, visual abstraction, linguistic abstraction. They're all tickling some part of the brain that wants to be, yeah, free of the structures of language, and yeah, settle into that other kind of space, that like oh shoot, I'm forgetting that word that I want to think of. Yeah, anyways, yeah, definitely.
Well, tickle the brain's a pretty good word, dude. You're a
Thanks.
wordsmith.
Yeah, yeah,
Well, Chomsky says the language is not just words. It's a culture, a tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is.
yeah.
What do you do when language breaks down? When language doesn't work, what do you do?
Gosh, like probably huff and puff and stomp around a bit. I don't know.
Huff and puff. That's
Yeah,
good.
yeah. I mean, I don't know. Try to enjoy it.
Yeah. Enjoy it. Very good. Your observations of humans in general. Again, it's a stupid question, just your hunch. Are we more thinking beings or more feeling beings?
I think. I mean, I'm tempted to say these days we're pretty feeling beings, which is good, and it is good and yeah. I mean, talk about silly words to use. Good and bad,
Yeah.
useful,
Yeah.
unhelpful. I don't necessarily. I feel like I don't want every feeling to be rationalized, but sometimes I'd like to see people slow
Yeah.
their feeling down, or that translation from feeling, to thought, or feeling to word, or to action. Even just sometimes it feels like we benefit from a kind of different kind of time
Yeah.
stuff.
It's like trying to consciously breathe. That just
Yeah,
simply that. In
yeah,
the day, how many times can you go, well, I'll just consciously breathe now? It's like, So these two are from Alan Turing in the 1950s. One, is thinking a function of the soul?
Yeah, yeah. In that, I think everything must be a function of the whole human, you know, being mechanism, the being in the world, the soul, whatever you want to call it. That like, excuse me, totality of kind of like sensual entanglement with the world. You know,
Yeah.
thought comes out of that for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Can machines think?
probably.
Yeah.
I mean, I recently, there's all this, anxiety about AI these days, excitement too, whatever, a whole spectrum of things. One of the best, I mean, I feel usually behind the curve on keeping up with the kind of understanding of machine intelligence and AI, but one of my favorite science fiction authors is Kim Stanley Robinson, who, is prone to imagining a distant future in which some degree of great progressive social transformation has occurred, which doesn't mean the world is, or the universe, the galaxy is like a perfect place. There's not necessarily harmony, even though things like, socialism have been accomplished. Anyways, his worlds require artificial intelligence, like fully realized artificial intelligence. And in one of his recent books, he describes the AI as like essentially benevolent just because rather than engaging with the human world, AI just like dreams to itself. They like build
Wow.
these dream worlds and kind of don't bother with us, which I think was one of the most optimistic angles on, machine intelligence that I've read, which is that maybe we don't have to be afraid because they're just going to be bored with humanity.
That is, I'm doing a big Zoom salon on this, and I'm definitely going to bring that topic up alone. That's an amazing. Yeah, everybody's more it seems people my age are stressed out. Oh my God, it's the end of the world. Being an experimental filmmaker, I started asking this years ago, like, why
Sure.
aren't we just having computers make experimental films? Experimental films seem so random in the big picture that how could you ever tell if a AI or an algorithm made your film or a student made your film? And one of the film teachers I met in Ann Arbor said, "Oh yeah, I've had kids make experimental films with algorithms." And I goes, "Oh, but do they tell you it is? And can you tell? That's the big issue.
Sure.
Like, you know, so do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
What was the second meaning?
Meaning, yeah.
Yeah. Um, wow. I think in spite of myself, I'd like to be more of a pursuer of happiness. I think I pursue meaning. I mean,
Yeah.
this is just like me. I'm thinking through my life these days. Um, yeah,
Well, Ben, I got it from Viktor Frankl and Man's Search for Meaning book, and he basically says meaning usually lasts and happiness doesn't last. So does
yeah.
the brain, yeah,
I think happiness is like both one of those things. Like my first answer is like I want everyone to be happy,
yeah,
and I think happiness is like a really strange idea. Like you're saying, it can be fleeting. It can
yeah,
be a kind of injunction, like it's almost a commodity, or as far as an affect is concerned. It's like be happy,
yeah,
do what makes you happy. It's like, yeah, what's the layer beneath that? Or I don't know,
yeah,
I guess I'm interested, probably foolishly, in intellectual projects, and so oftentimes spend a lot of time, as maybe this all suggests, like trying to add things up and find new angles on life rather than just kind of immediate pleasure, I
yeah.
suppose.
Does the brain more detect consciousness or create it? Like, is consciousness there bubbling away and we're more so creating it or more so detecting it?
I think we're creating it. Yeah, I think consciousness, as far as it is an accident that is manifest in probably many species and potentially robots and computers, et cetera, et cetera. It's like, again, it's just a function of movement and doing and being and rhythm and I don't know, energy exchanges. So I think, yeah, I don't think consciousness is some sort of like transcendental thing that's kind of brought down to us or that we can reach up to. I think it's very earthy, it's from the ground up. I think it's totally created.
Earthy's a great word for that. Beautiful. What's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
Whoa, definitely speed of light, because thought is so slow sometimes. Um, and I think there's like that experience of consciousness that's really important where, I think we have to understand that the brain has this window between stimulus and thought, right? Like stimulus and response or action, like that gap is really interesting, and that consciousness and thought kind of catches up to the thing. So
Yeah.
I think the speed of light is important just because it puts us in perspective, on a kind of universal level, but also accounts for that, like the brain is always doing a kind of catch up with reality or with the world, I think.
Yeah. Audre Lorde, the poet, said, "You can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools." Yvonne Rainer responded and said, "You can if you expose the tools." What new tool do you suggest?
Whoa. What new tool do I suggest? Wow, that is a good one. Probably, probably just more reading Audre Lorde.
Now that's an astute listener. Just reading Audre Lorde.
Just like more attention to. I don't know. I think these days I'm really invested in understanding how tradition can be really radical and paying attention to radical traditions and learning and bringing forth old lessons. So I think a kind of for me recently, attention to the past has been really valuable for thinking about dismantling current and future structures. And I think, not getting, as people who want to do dismantling, not getting caught up in the same kinds of notions of progress that have gotten us here, and that like looking to the past, looking to elders, looking to ancestors, looking to old whatever past and previous thinkers and poets and magicians and wizards and all that for lessons. I think if that can be an answer, that would be my suggestion. That the tools are like, I don't know, maybe there's a whole other set of tools already available. We're just like focused on the wrong set of tools or something.
No, well, you very comprehensive there. You covered a lot of ground. And what new toy do you suggest?
I mean, again, maybe not a new one, but just, I'm excited by continuing to think about how possible is it for language to keep giving, and keep generating something like the new. Again, this is just as someone who thinks that it's remarkable and fascinating and special that poetry still exists after millennia.
Yeah.
Doing whatever the same things with words. Maybe it's just like never letting language settle is like the best kind of toy.
It's really beautiful. Love it. What do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
I'm a midnight warrior, so middle of the night warrior. Maybe like whether or not, I mean, I think I absorb a lot of anxiety around community. So whether or not current community will last. I don't know. Will have me. I don't know. Social anxiety is very real for me.
Yeah.
But also, like, will I make another movie? You know.
Yeah. McLuhan learned from the poet Ezra Pound that artists are the antenna of the race. They're broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions. So we might be able to cope with what we don't like about the inventions. So, Ben, I asked you the question Marshall probed his whole career. Why do we ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though the artists are broadcasting them to us?
I see. Why do we ignore can you say that again? Why do we ignore
like the hidden psychic effects of our inventions? So, you look to the mediums, you work in poetry, film. These people are sort of broadcasting something a little deeper.
Sure.
And why do we basically ignore the artist broadcasting these hidden psychic effects to us?
And do you mean like we really, you mean like broadly, like there's an assumption?
Broadly, yeah, broadly. I mean, sometimes people challenge, and it's really me and you versus the wording on the question. So this is good. When you question the question, that really susses it out better.
Yeah,
I'm sort of saying we all do this, but like me and you are like artists, so we're like, well, we don't do that, but all the normal people do. But I mean, we do too. So not to sound elitist, it's like, why do people kind of in general ignore,
Yeah. I mean, I think so. I'm thinking about it a lot right now, not the least of which is like just to myself, the gentle reminder that Ezra Pound was a fascist.
Yeah.
And to be suspicious of that, as someone who has also like gleaned a lot from his legacy and impact on poetry and arts.
Wait, Ben, you mean you separate the art from the artist? You like, I know he has that background, but I'm still tuned into what he did as a poet, or you're saying,
well, that there's like, again, that I mean, it's like I can bracket, I can't entirely separate, and there's like a nuanced middle path for for that, but also just on that particular level, I learned about Pound and his project and was really enamored and learned a lot, and also what Pound did for a broader approach to poetry and the impacts he had, the friends he had, and so on and so forth. And then I learned about his politics. And then that doesn't like cancel out that. I can't undo the stuff that like the first time I read. I mean, I won't pretend to be versed in the cantos because that stuff is just so hard. But the first time I kind of dabbled in some of it and understood some portion of it, I was like, a door opened in my mind. Yeah, you can't close that door just because I learned that he had some pretty bogus politics.
Right.
So there's that like complexity and that unease and that middle space, and I think it's really good to parse out, work through, sit in. I think what I'm thinking about in relation to your answer is this turn of phrase Fred Moten used in a talk he gave on music once, about he's kind of framing it around this song "Alone Together" and using the idea. He gave this talk in the quarantine, so everyone was alone on screens, stuck at home, but being the kind of curious phenomena of being alone together. But he talked about complacency, and that was the word I was thinking about in relation to your question, which is like complacency is a really hard thing to undo, and it
Yeah.
happens a bunch of different ways. And then Moten offered this thing that continues to resonate with me, this question of like, who wants not to be complacent?
Yeah.
Because complacency is the kind of like place in the tribe, place in the community. And so we all want that, which is why maybe we suppress some stuff, suppress knowledge of some stuff in favor of like the immediacy of, you know, cohabitation and,
Yeah.
you know, commingling, complacency, like the positive of that. Who doesn't want that? You know, who wants to stand outside of something? But, you know, complacency can be dangerous when it's complacent to structures that have like murderous intent behind them. So I mean, it's, yeah, I don't know. I mean,
No, you sussed it out beautifully, Ben, and brought up a lot, but you have ESP because you anticipated the next question. Do artists have moral obligation?
I think artists have, oh man, I'm gonna say this. I think artists have ethical obligations. I don't know if artists are beholden to certain morals. I think morals shift and are funny, and I think ethics are, I don't know, they're more based in that the messiness of an encounter. And I
Yeah.
think artists are, I think art is like ethically compelled by the idea that there will be an encounter with another person, and that
Yeah.
the responsibility the artist has is just to address another, you know,
Yeah.
on some level, like even if that means challenge or I mean, some
Yeah.
artists are really interested in harm or conflict or pain, you know, things like
Yeah.
that. I'm not going to say if it was a moral obligation, one might say, well, you can't cause pain to anybody with your artwork.
Yeah.
But I don't know, discomfort in art seems really useful. So,
Yeah.
but I don't know. That's a tricky one for me. I don't actually know if I think artists are if anyone is obligated to anybody, and so
Yeah.
artists fit into that. I think for me, art is made with some ethics,
Yeah.
notion of ethics underlying it.
Yeah, McLuhan loved this line. The Balinese have no word for art. They do everything as well as they can.
That's really nice.
Are you more afraid of new ideas or more afraid of old ideas?
Mm, hmm. So many different ways to approach that question. I'm more afraid of old ideas, and this doesn't have to do with what I was saying about. This is like the inverse of what I was saying about tradition and like learning from the ideas of our like ancestors and elders, and you
Yeah.
know, it's like the ideas that really scare me in the world about the world are old ones. You know,
Yeah.
they've been with us for a long time. Things like just that question that everyone always hurls at politicians: how are you going to pay for it?
Yeah.
Like, those ideas scare me. They're kind of like stuck in our ways, being stuck in our ways. That really scares me. Ideas, you know, racism really scares me. Transphobia really scares me. So like old things that have been with us for too long, that it's like we're way past the point of being ready to jettison. That's like what scares me.
Yeah. Thank you. Can you conjure up your earliest memory ever or one of them?
Wow. Yeah. I mean, one of my earliest memories ever, when I was, so I'm in Wisconsin now, but I was born in Cambridge and lived for a short time as a kiddo in Dorchester, Boston. That's where my folks met. And at the time, my dad was a caterer. He had a catering company that he had started. And one of the memories I have really distinctly is like being a very young kid wandering around in the place where he stored all of his catering equipment, all of the cooking implements and like being a child and all of these objects having a kind of supersized scale to them just because I was so small and it all seemed so impossibly large. You know, like a mixer that's that big, like what? Yeah, I don't know, but yeah.
Is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
I mean, definitely a blessing. Because I think one of the best things about memory is when memory. Oh, sorry, my little cat is moving around. This is Monty, by the way, little guy.
Hello, Monty.
Yeah, I think like, I mean, memory forgetting really scares me. Like memory loss really freaks me out. And yet, one of the most beautiful things is like the feeling that comes along with the memory where you're like not quite sure of.
Yeah.
So like memories that I kind of half remember or might have fabricated from my youth, I feel like on some positive level created these kind of like shadowy impressions that led to my taste in art and music and things like that. If that makes sense.
Oh, yeah. Beautiful. In fact, if you could tell me someone within your immediate family and then outside your immediate family, just briefly, who had an impact on you, kind of like a role model, and what specifically was that impact?
Yeah. Well, in my family, my immediate family, I mean, I tend to give a lot of. So my mother, before she kind of shifted gears and decided that it wasn't going to be sustainable for her long term, was an artist, was a theatrical, a stage actress, performer. She tried like really hard to make a kind of off Broadway career happen when she was in her 20s. She was studied folks like Bertolt Brecht, who would eventually be a big relative influence on me. Though she never like necessarily introduced me to that stuff. I think she just offered a lot of permission. She was really encouraging and made art seem okay, like
Yeah.
a permissible thing to do. Outside of my family, I mean, my college mentor, Abraham Rivette, a really talented filmmaker, um, just really cracked things open for me. It was the person who introduced me to experimental film in a kind of proper sense, in the way that we tend to mean it when we talk about the history of experimental film, and not just like the precedents for that. And he just always asked the best kinds of questions. Yeah.
I love Abraham and his films, and I've interviewed him with all these questions in the past. Beautiful. So, did your parents raise you a particular religion?
No, for a short period of time, I mean, my mom's family is Irish Catholic, and my dad's family is some variety of Protestant. I believe we attended Episcopalian church for a little bit when I was a kiddo. I can only really remember it between Boston, where I mentioned I spent a few of my youngest years, and then I spent a few years in upstate New York, and I somewhat distinctly, I remember going to church in Sunday school. I don't really remember any of the content therein. And then my folks kind of gave up when we relocated to the Midwest. I think because my dad in particular was sort of never on board. I think my mom remained kind of privately like spiritual or a believer. So like a short amount of time, but nothing super impactful. That said, I don't know. I mean, I still feel like the messed up long arms of the Protestant work ethic, like somewhere hardwired into my being. Not as a believer, just as like a kind of the way that it maybe establishes like the conditions of possibility for white Anglo-Saxon Protestant person who
Yeah.
like originates in New England. I don't know.
Yeah. Ben, do you pray?
No. I mean,
If God,
I think, yeah.
if God exists, what would you like God to say to you after you die?
Nice work. Sort of like, what's up? Welcome to the afterlife.
I get welcome a lot. Welcome home. That's beautiful. Do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
I think evil people exist. In that I think there are poisonously selfish people in the world. Yeah.
The hidden question really is how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? And I'll set it up. Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from the mob and the samurais. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK says, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini says, I need an enemy. So it's a lot of thoughts. Basic question is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you respond to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
I mean, I suppose I would say, sure, but like the nothing ends at empowerment, you know. Um, I don't know. I get maybe in a way that I think I can't escape some connection to the way that Michel Foucault described the machinations of power, which is that it as like a diffuse force that's always there and always being exchanged and always, moving between sides and actors and agents. Yeah, on some level, it's like, yeah, sure. Excuse me. People get power, gain power, become empowered, but nothing ends there. So it's sort of like, what's the next step? Where do you go from there? So
Yeah.
acknowledging your enemy maybe gives them some power, but I think the formulation of enemy is like, it suggests a conflict to resolve, and so you gotta figure out the next move, and whether or not that's disconnection and freeing yourself from the situation or something, or if it's direct confrontation. It's
Yeah.
always about the next step, I think.
Next step. Very good. In fact, Nassim Taleb said games were created to give non-heroes the illusion of winning. In real life, we don't know who wins or loses, but we can tell who a hero is.
Mm.
Someone responded to that and said, villains don't think they're bad. They want control. Heroes want freedom. And Gregory Bateson says, if the criminal gets caught, does he go, oh, my criminal skills weren't up to snuff that day? Or does he go, wow, I did something morally and socially wrong? So it's a lot of prompts. Basic question is, does punishment work?
Um, I don't think so. Or I think that our current notions of punishment are really messed up.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking about, you know, some of the principles that I've been, trying to familiarize myself with, ideas and practices of transformative justice.
Yeah.
And I have heard situations described where it's like you could construe it as a punishment, but one thing that may occur from a kind of confrontation between, like a victim and a perpetrator or something, is the like ostracization or the kind of the community exiling of a person. Is that a punishment? I don't know. Or is that something more active and collective that can still be undone? Like certain kinds of punishment can't be taken back, or like, I don't know. I don't know. It's maybe too abstract for me. But I think a lot of our notions of punishment are some of those old ideas that I'm afraid of these days.
Yeah. James Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin about 100 years ago. He basically checked out. He said, "This is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree?" Years later, Faulkner said, "Sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism." Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
Well, I mean, I think of Joyce as like one of the best humorists ever. So sometimes just living doesn't contain the joke, and it's like worth it to come up with a punchline or something, to like reduce all of Joyce to just telling jokes, which it isn't. But I don't know. I mean, I think the superfluous is also beautiful and essential to human experience, and it's like you know a painting of a tree becomes a tree of a different kind of a different kind of tree, right? Like another kind of object to encounter in the world, and there's, I don't know, the potential for like infinite pleasure. So why not?
Yeah. Great observation of Joyce. He did nail it. He says, "Where the hand of man never set foot." So Ben, sort of walk us through. Your mom is doing this pursuit of theater, and where are you? Your tipping points where you go, I want to be a filmmaker. And then, more specifically, I want to be an experimental filmmaker. And then I want to be an educator. And I think your attraction to poetry, I don't know, do you write poetry?
Yeah, some. I mean,
Yeah.
not as often as I'd like, or sort of like yeah.
But also that, because I mean, I know your films are filled with text, or a lot of them have the text, and you're writing that text, I imagine.
Most of it's adapted or borrowed.
Is it?
Yeah, it's
Okay.
been a while since I've just straight up written a
Yeah.
script or the language.
Well, that's just that tipping point. I mean, what did you study in college and high school? Was it literature? And then you felt, what's your calling, your tipping point calling?
Yeah, well, in way back in high school, I was really drawn to studying music, and jazz music in particular was really influential to me. I never had the skill for that. I mean, or I think I discovered something that I was more drawn to. Well, yeah, in filmmaking, that to me did something that jazz music was also doing. And around the time I was absorbing a lot of jazz music, I was starting to dabble in some philosophy and uh, unconventional literature, and I think it just kind of, it all in my brain became this big soup, and I saw the potential in filmmaking for a medium to contain all of that stuff. For it to feel like the way that certain songs made me feel, or to act on people in the way that certain songs acted, for it to have literary structure, storytelling, literal, material language, and then also just really being really drawn to being with camera in hand. So yeah, back then I would say that a tipping point was, well, it's always for me, I absorb so much from people. So I mean, I was determined. I thought I wanted to study music, and then I met some people and I started making films with them, and very quickly, kind of, that led me to a heightened love of cinema. I mean, like as a kid growing up in the suburbs, I mean, who isn't a sort of cinephile at, at 16 or something. But yeah, and then I think just other ingredients in that soup were like dabbling in some very, political activism. I mean, I was in high school when, George Bush was quote unquote elected, and 9/11 happened and the war in Iraq began, and dabbled in protest movements at a pretty entry level, but there's just a lot going on, a
Yeah.
lot of stimulus. And then I think that made me want to go to a college that was less conventional, because I just felt really suspicious of a lot of cultural norms. And so I sought out a small school. I mean, privileged to be able to do so, to seek out a small school that operated on its own wavelength, against the grain of the mainstream. And there is where I got exposed to experimental film and met poets, and then, just wanted to keep drawing all of these like ideas and energies towards me. And I think film just sort of stuck. And then teaching emerged on a pragmatic level, because I think I didn't have any illusions at the time that making films of this sort were going to make me money. And I didn't want, so there's like two sides to this coin. On some level, I didn't want to sacrifice the way I was interested in making films to the needs of a commercial market. I didn't want to. I much more enjoyed working against the way other people were making films. Like, I was studying with people who were, making comedies and things like that. And I really liked positioning myself against that way of working.
Right.
No shade on comedies at all. And then, just like being realistic with myself. Like, I'm going to need a day job. I mean, I'm going to need
Yeah.
to work. And then, on some level, again, my mentor, Abraham Rivette, just was, and others at Hampshire College, like Robert Seidel, rest in peace, and Joan Braderman, and others, just imparted such a like powerful imprint on me for what teaching could do, the kind of permission you could offer people, the way you could get people energized and excited and confused. And I don't know, I just saw these people working as working artists, and teaching being the way that they sustained themselves. And it seemed to bring them a lot of joy. And I thought, this is really special. And mentorship, I think, struck me as something really meaningful. So I thought I would love to do that if possible. Yeah.
Well put. A screenwriting teacher told me great art is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Kubrick says the opposite. Great art is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. What role does intention play in your creative process when you're making one of your short experimental films?
Yeah. I mean, I'm really enamored of the Kubrick take, the idea that intention doesn't necessarily need to be one like completely available or legible. I love work that rests in a space of mystery and uncertainty and ambiguity. Ambiguity is really exciting for me.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, the reality is I don't know if I am as determined I don't make films necessarily from a personal place. So I don't need an audience to be thinking about me and my intention. I do want something to be gleaned from the work. So I guess my feeling of intention is that the work amount to something in the mind of another, and that there be ideas available, that like a film will lead someone else to interesting places and thoughts and feelings. And I guess, like I worry about that result. Like, so if there's anything that I question about my own intentions or like feel really intent on, it's getting to that point, getting to the point where I think the film is like getting something across. I mean, the film that you just saw or recently saw at Ann Arbor was like a funny one in this instance, because I can remember reaching the point of finishing that film and thinking, this one feels like a big risk because I can tell there's the greatest opportunity for people to be totally confounded. Which, again, like I said, I like that space of confoundment, but I do want people to feel like it's for them and not just me, spinning a pinwheel for my own pleasures. Like, I really want, I think about films as being for the viewer, for other people. And that film, looking backward, was one where, as I was finishing it, there was a certain kind of storm of private intentions, and there's like a private dimension of that film that isn't in the film. It's not meant to be legible to anybody else, but it was the reason that I kind of let the thing stay in this totally strange, ambiguous, abstract space, rather than like reinventing it and kind of going back to the drawing board and starting more from this is going to tell you X, Y, and Z, about the subject of the film. So that was like a funny moment for me of like thinking through my own intention. What did I want this film to get across through what means, and what was my own will, trying to gauge my own comfort with like letting it out there into the world in a form that feels really, it's just such a weird film to me. Like, every time I watch it, I'm having a blast. I understand it's got a lot of the feeling in there for me, and then I worry that people will just see it and just go, "What?"
Yeah.
And that's also the challenge of making, now that I'm working in a way that's much closer to nonfiction, to documentary, but while like still using these very lyrical and experimental strategies. It's like that. It's hard to figure out where it's going to land for other people. If people both see it as something with documentary information, to use your earlier term, and be open to the experience of it being lyrical and musical. I don't know.
Beautiful, because you anticipated the next question. I got to ask it anyways, but you really answered it. And Duchamp said, "There's no art without an audience." How much do you think of your audience when you're making your film?
I guess I don't. I mean,
Yeah.
I think it's one of those questions that artists are so often asked, be it in classrooms or grant applications and things like that. I just think it's sort of silly to even think you can predict your audience. I mean, I have no pretenses about my audience, not being a kind of experimental film community. But within that, I mean, I always hope that there will be surprises, and I guess I think about, would I understand this if I saw someone else making this film?
Right.
Which is not to say I'm making the movie for myself, but like, it's the best way I can, understand how the thing will possibly read.
Yeah. It's like when musicians, back to your interest in jazz, can the musician mute his ears completely and compose a piece of music without hearing it? Can the filmmaker make the film with they are their audience, and then there's the people who are consuming it. So McLuhan says everything we invent extends some humanness, like knife and fork extend our teeth, the shutter in a camera extends our eyelid, maybe even non-tangible like religion or philosophy extends consciousness. What does the film camera extend for you? I mean, you've worked a lot in Super 8, 16 millimeter. You've worked in actually the film camera. What does that extend for you? What humanness?
I think the act of looking, just really that like simply being in a place can be an opportunity or a moment of even like historical transmission, that I'm really enamored of the kind of old-fashioned idea of the indexical in film, that the mere presence of the camera before a person or an object or in a place allows some sort of direct transmission of that place through the medium, whether it's film or digital. I think that indexicality is really exciting and makes me think, that the first gesture of a filmmaker can simply be bringing your camera to a particular place, and even if that's like the private space of the domestic or the home, but that simple being in space of the camera, there's something there, some many things there. And for me these days, it's like exploring certain spaces, be they old experimental colleges or public landscapes in Milwaukee, that just I'm always trying to kind of extend the image and make it dynamic through movement and composition, obviously, but even just the like bringing the camera on a tripod to a certain space, that's the first gesture. That's the starting point. That's some communion can happen there between the artist and viewer and the space itself. I don't know. And and I think people like Straub and Ouillet and John Gianvito are artists who I think, and Deb Stratman kind of like work in that way, the sort of historicity of the camera or something.
Yeah. It also reminds me of Carl Andre. He said sculpture as place. Peter Greenaway said cinema is much too rich a medium to be left to storytellers. Are experimental filmmakers telling stories a different way or doing something completely different? If me and you watch Tony Conrad's The Flicker, we might have a story go through our head, but it's basically not storytelling per se.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I love Greenaway. I love that quote. It's just so funny to me because he's also like so engaged directly with story. And I think of him as hyper literary too.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm thinking about context and how the story of the film to me seems always most first and foremost, maybe about the context in which it's made. So like the Conrad's Flicker seems really most important as a kind of transmission of a moment, a historical moment, a context. One thinks of like his music too. Like you can't think of Conrad and his films without thinking about his music, without thinking about his sculpture and his social experiments. And I think of what Greenaway film am I thinking about? The Cook, the Thief, His Wife, and Her Lover, as like like that film is doing one thing on the level of story, but contextually, historically, it's this, seething response to Thatcherism, and so like the way that movie really means is kind of outside of itself, or it's like in connection with its context. And I think, I think that's like the level of story for experimental film is sort of the context in which the object is working, the other things it's in conversation with. That's where story comes from. I think the phenomenological experience of Flicker is maybe a story about like you and your own brain. It's like, what's happening? What am I, what's happening to me right now?
Yeah. Even Andrew Noren said an interesting thing. If you put one frame next to another frame, that's storytelling. It doesn't matter if it's abstract in each frame. It's still storytelling. But Hollis Frampton said narrative is born among the animal necessities of the spirit because we're waiting to die. Can you forget to die?
Sure. Yeah, sure. Like also your brain can disconnect from knowing before you before you reach your mortal ends. Just on a scientific level, probably.
There's no right or wrong answers to any of these questions, but that one you got right, Ben.
Yeah.
What are the services and disservices of marginalizing experimental film? Jackson Pollock was on the cover of Life magazine in 1949. Regular folks could start developing an aesthetic on experimental painting. There was no Bruce Conner or Maya Dare in Life magazine covers. Generally, it's privileged, entitled kids who are developing avant-garde aesthetic and dominate the experimental film world. Any comment?
I mean, I'm just thinking right now about, well, I'm grateful to my comrade and colleague, Andrew Mousert Mooney, for recently having stimulated a lot of conversations around this. But, you know, this is something that's been on my mind before, but he reframed this for me in a really interesting way. So the first thing I'm thinking is like Pollock being on Life magazine also exists within the context of like the CIA funding to some extent.
Yep.
Like journals and institutions that put a certain amount of attention on abstract expressionist painting as the like kind of American free aesthetic to, draw attention to our art scene over and above the, socialist realism and functionalism of like the Soviet aesthetic. So I think that's an interesting context in which to think through this. And then my friend Andrew Mousert Mooney has been curious. He and his creative partner, Kara McKenzie, have been kind of thinking through how that legacy might also work its way into the workings of experimental cinema as a kind of like inheritor of other sort of like state-funded art projects, the state preference for the AB-X. I don't know. So, who doesn't love a good conspiracy? So I guess, I don't know. I think on a personal level, I really worry about the marginalization of any kind of art form. And certainly in the context of the hyper commodified current state of cinema, I get really just like frustrated on a daily basis that there isn't more latitude in the public sphere for different types of cinema. Even if that were just like indie art narratives, in my lifetime, I've seen a lot of smaller productions kind of disappear, under the pressures of the kind of like Marvelification, Disneyfication of the cinema world. So I guess the way to bend those two things back is like, while it's also marginalized, experimental cinema isn't inherently good, on a political level or inherently progressive. So I think those things are interesting to think through together, which is like, abstraction can be a tool for complacency, for not making, more dogmatic, politically radical content. And I think it's a shame culturally that art forms like poetry and experimental cinema and jazz music and aren't supported. It's like a crying shame. So.
Yeah. Lots to unpack there, Ben. You're really sharp thinker and good researcher, because there's also a book on how experimental film was, let's say, have you ever seen that book? I'm going to send you the title because I can't even think of it, but I have. How the experimental film scene was also, avant-garde film was also, let's say, infiltrated by the CIA.
Oh yeah, I would love to read that, and I would really like to pass that on to my friend.
I bet you your friend Andrew's seen it, but I'll send you the title.
Great.
But it goes back to your mom's interest in Brecht too. Bertolt Brecht said, hey, I don't want art that puts you in a trance. I want art that activates you. But the fact is that something that puts you in a trance might flip into activating you. So, it's a slippery slope.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I spoke with Michael Apted 40 years ago. I said, why do rock video editors feel so obliged to edit fast? He says, because we've learned to take in information faster. This is right when MTV was causing Marty Scorsese to say, I cut my films faster because of MTV. Most people don't know Abel Gance invented rapid montage in 1922. But my question is, and it's asked with a bias, can we indeed learn to take in information faster, or are we just brainwashed to believe we can?
Yeah, I think there's a limit, and I'm really suspicious of the idea that we can just go, we can always progress to some other horizon of speed. I mean, I'm thinking about, I just talked with a friend. I was in LA last week visiting with a friend who works for, like a digital post-production company, and he was describing working with the filmmaker Ang Lee.
Yeah.
Like Ang Lee's recent pursuit of the kind of like high frame rate 3D, in this like, which I think figures into somehow to, quite obviously into like a framework of speed and increasing information, just like more information on screen, more real, hyper real. And that to me seems like a kind of techno fatalism, techno utopianism that I'm like not at all convinced by. I think there's also just like the human body, only it has its own biorhythms, and and that's like special. That's what makes certain music both like energize us, and certain music can like tap into our biorhythms. And I mean, and why we need to be able to slow down and take notice of the breath. So I think, I mean, as like an out of fashion, enthusiast for the slow and the quiet, especially in cinema. I don't know. I'm really suspicious of like faster. I think there's absolutely a limit.
Right. Is it literally possible for humans to multitask?
Yeah, definitely. And some minds move, I think, can only process while doing more than one thing at once. So I think so. I'm a pretty good multitasker myself.
Ben, what informed your framing aesthetic? So you know how filmmakers do this, and I notice how you have the moon go off into the corner of your frame. What do you think was did you grow up looking at what informed your framing aesthetic for your experimental films?
I mean, I was lucky as a kid to have a decent amount of like nature spaces, or spend a decent amount of time in natural spaces. I mean, growing up in upstate New York, and my father was like a big fan of Vermont, so we spent time there as kids, as a family. I mean, so that's like one of them, is a kind of enduring interest in the like the, I guess, the sublime, or like the natural landscape, the non-human landscape, space, the big night sky, things like that. And then I think, just kind of like being a human being with a limited window. I love the camera's limited window, and the way that I can be like a head, moving around in the world, tumbling and peeking and getting close and far. And all that.
Beautiful. I asked Bruce Bailey this question in Ann Arbor, and he said, Jean Cocteau said, we formed our framing aesthetic on the way we put the knife and fork down on the dinner table.
That's very strange to me.
What was the motive of the cave artist?
Play.
Oh, what a great word. What's more important, conviction or compromise?
Conviction.
You've accomplished a lot. How do you rate these three elements? Luck, skill, and ambition. What played the biggest role, second and third?
I mean, I think like ambition and luck are closely tied. Just, I think, I mean, I work really hard, and I've been kind of walking the path, and I saw that path, I found that path, and I walked it in a very determined way. I mean, luck is, as like a cishet white dude, luck and privilege are very real forces. So I think that's something I try and remind myself of, that I was lucky to study at a small liberal arts college, not in the state that I grew up in.
Yeah.
And yeah, certainly I think some doors were just wider open for me than probably for other people in the world. So I don't chalk it all up to that, but I think it's good for me to check myself always, be interrogating, things like that. So, but I think ambition, skill, I guess I'm just like, I feel like I've learned a lot, and I hope I'm always dubious about my skill as a filmmaker. I hope that other people watch them and think my films and think, oh wow, he knows what he's doing. Or it seems like he's like got his craft down. I mean, I think craft is really beautiful, and I love that I can keep spending the rest of my life improving my skills. I think skill is also like kind of uninteresting, and I don't think, like a really bad joke can be funny. A really badly written poem can be beautiful and remarkable, and yeah, I don't know. So I think skill is, yeah. I mean, I've been a much worse filmmaker, and I kept pushing through, and I would tell everybody to like that it's not about making the perfect film; it's about making the next film.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ben, that was well put, because back to poetry, I think Oscar Wilde said, even bad poetry can have sincere feelings.
Yeah, absolutely.
And another poet said that poetry is outing your inner dialogue. What language is your inner dialogue in?
I don't know. I think I'm figuring that out.
Well, that's all right. It's one of my favorite answers. Abigail Child says, I wish I knew.
God, such a big fan of Abigail's.
I know it. She's great. So two of my film heroes, George Manupelli's mantra is ignore yourself. Jonas Mekas says there is no self-expression. And Cecil Taylor, the great jazz pianist, says, I'm just a vehicle and this stuff just comes through me. Is art making more self-expression or more your vehicle for whatever technologies, cultures, and environments are dominant?
I mean, I think, again, this is like, for me, a real somewhere between the two. I think for me, art is like for me, it's about undoing the self. That like the self is a technology, the self is formed and informed by so many social structures and constraints, and like for me, or just getting to know oneself is like undoing the known self and finding the unconscious self, right? So I think for me, it's all about undoing, and questioning the world that I take for granted.
Yeah, it really well put. Can art making be egoless?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, or that I'm most interested in work that seems to be pushing beyond the boundaries of the ego.
Yeah. Is perception reality?
Unfortunately.
Lewis Carroll says, I believe as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast. Have you believed in any impossible things lately?
Oh, I'm tempted to give the wry answer, which is like not nearly enough. And then there's like the sincere answer, which is, you know, as like someone who does labor organizing part-time in Wisconsin, you know, I still think we can win. So,
yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
In fact, Sunrise says the impossible attracts me because everything possible has been done and the world didn't change.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah. If there's anyone we should be taking our cues from, it's Sun Ra.
Hello. Tell me one major element of your creativeness that's changed and one major element that stayed the same in the years you've been doing this.
I mean, I think understanding the relationship between art and creativity, and to use a really blunt word, politics or the political, is like has been a major change for me over the last few years. Someone who really unlocked that for me is the poet Bernadette Mayer, you know, who was Gesundheit.
Thank you. Sorry.
Fond. Oh, you're fine. Fond of the phrase, you know, give everything to everyone, I think.
Yeah.
And something that stayed the same, probably my inability to use fewer words.
Wow. Well, that's perfect to follow up. Moshe Feldenkrais says it's literally possible to identify a weakness and incorporate it to become a strength rather than we're normally taught to overcome a weakness. Tell me a weakness you turned into a strength.
Maybe my fear of writing or something, leading to being a good reader. And
fear of writing into being a good reader. Amazing.
Yeah.
Wow, that's very articulate. I'm there with you. That's the same as me. Utah Phillips says anarchy is making rules for yourself and not other people. Who's entitled to make the rules?
Nobody, or like everybody together.
Yeah.
I mean, I think as someone who's still learning a lot about what anarchism and mutualism really means, I mean, it seems to me really important that no one occupy the position of authority, and everybody have the opportunity to have a say, you know, in the process. So if rules need to be made, they should always be made by the many and not by the few.
Yeah. Ben, there's a line that goes, you create what you resist. Bob Goldthwait, the comedian, morphed it into you are what you hate. In fact, James Joyce says it's a curious thing how your mind is super saturated with the religion in which you say you disbelieve. And Louis Buñuel nailed it. He said, thank God I'm an atheist. So any thoughts on this line? You create what you resist. I'm not saying you, Ben, but one creates what one resists. Any thoughts on that line?
Yeah, I'm not sure that I think it's probably true. I don't know if I have anything to say besides that.
No. These are 5 quick Alan Watts questions, just off the top of your head, in a few words. Number 1, who started it all?
Who started it all? Oh man, sorry. I think I'm too dull brains today for that. Who started it all? No, I don't have a good answer for this.
That's all right. Number 2 is, are we going to make it?
Yes.
3, where do we put it?
Yeah, I don't know. Somewhere that we can all find it.
Nice. 4, who's cleaning it up?
We all are. Everyone helps.
5, is it serious?
Definitely. It's also funny.
Beautiful. Few more and we're out of here. Thanks, Ben. This has been really fun. How do you find peace of mind?
Long walks.
Yeah.
These days, yeah.
If you were walking down the street today and you met yourself as a 12-year-old, what would you say to your 12-year-old self?
Keep playing music.
Which way should toilet paper come off the roll, over or under?
It's different every time.
Ah,
Not literally every time. I'm always mounting it differently. In fact, I never know which way it's supposed to go.
well, I'll tell you, 80 to 90% of people say over. The patent illustration has it going over, but the people who say it goes under have their reasons.
I can only imagine reasons why not to do it that way, and yet I really, truly, every time I mount toilet paper, I do it differently each time because I feel like there should be an answer to this, and it feels like there isn't.
If a publisher was to release your autobiography off the top of your head, what would the title be?
It would be, no clue.
They want to scent the glue in the binding. What smell?
Wait, say that again?
They want to scent the glue in the binding of your autobiography. What smell?
Pine needles.
If a statue was built in your honor, where would you want it displayed and what would it be made of?
It would be like hidden out of sight, maybe accessible by a small footpath by some body of water, and it would be small. It would be very plain stone.
Beautiful. Tell me something good you never had and you never want.
Everything I asked for.
You nailed it, man. That's a question people get stumped with. You got it. If you were in a vat of vomit up to your neck and someone threw a bag of shit at your face, what would you do?
I would hold my breath and I would submerge.
What's the cultural shift you see developing today that inspires you? I don't have a good answer for that one either. Oh, it's general militants. I think especially young people are really fed up with the way things are, and I think that's great. Yes, indeed. And in fact, I'm curious, Ben, what does courage mean to you now? You know, Leonard Cohen says the only way you can sell a concert is to put yourself at risk. And if you don't do that, people know. You know, you talked about risk, the role of risk in your creative process. What does courage mean to you now?
I think it means being willing to interrogate even what I like my defaults, or my own tastes or things that just being always on the move and within my own sense of what I like, what I expect, what I hope for, I think.
Yeah. We didn't get to go into music, and I would like to, but just a couple quick music questions. My friend says the three T's of music are technique, theory, and taste. And you just mentioned this word taste. You know, technique, you can study how to do it. Theory is, the structure. How does one acquire taste?
Just like living, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, taste is a really fraught word, but I think within that there's just experience. You know,
McLuhan said song is slowed down speech. The reason cultures have different musical taste is ultimately connected to language difference. Any comment?
I think that sounds about right.
Yeah.
But also, like language is bound up in ritual, but also just ritual. How we spend time together, what we do, what our routines are. Also seems to be where music. One sings while one does other things, or song might come from certain kinds of activities. So I think it's also about gesture. But like you said, quoting Chomsky earlier, language is also culture and gesture and all this other stuff. So
What's more fundamental, music or language?
music, I think we probably sang before we spoke or
Yeah.
made noises.
Anthony Burgess says we must now ask some very different questions about the relationship between music and life. What question remains unresolved for you?
Hmm. Um, I don't know. I mean, many. Yeah. I don't think I have a big question in mind, or maybe I should put some more thought into that.
No worries. Got three more and we're out of here. Thank you, Ben. How has making experimental films shaped your behavior?
Well, it has certainly impacted what I seek out in the world, how I spend my time.
Yeah.
Um, it's also, I think it's made me, on some levels, more social, um, because I think experimental cinema often requires the the creation of opportunities. I mean, I'm an independent programmer outside of the university, so making events has become a huge part of my life. And that I think, even with aspirations to be a musician, which has a kind of publicness, I'm just really comfortable trying to make things happen. I think that's great. There's a lot of lessons learned there.
Yeah, you get a bonus question because you brought that up and I left it out, but you're a curator, micro cinema, they call them, or, you curate films too. If me and you and George Manupelli were starting the Ann Arbor Film Festival like 6 decades ago, would you want it to be more inclusive or more exclusive? You know, keep in mind that it's always featured a fraction of animations and documentaries, but it's mainly experimental film. When I asked Chick Strand about this, she was starting Canyon Cinema around the same time, and she said, we were trying to recreate our 11-cent movie-going experience, you know, seeing a newsreel, a cartoon, and then throw in an experimental film. Brackage came along and says, don't show that other stuff, just show experimental film. So how would you feel? Should we be more inclusive or more exclusive?
I think we should just show the work that's most meaningful.
Yeah.
And that creates the conversation. I think for me, it's like the work that makes a conversation possible. You know, if that means there's the variety might, or the variety might come and go at times. But yeah, I think both of those, like, again, some words that can be really cumbersome or awkward is like exclusive and inclusive. Like, excluding, you know, experimental narratives might mean making more space for marginal voices that are making experimental films. You know, it's hard. It's a hard line to walk, or hard needle to thread, or something.
It is very hard. Thornton Wilder said, art is confession. Art is the secret told. But art is not only the desire to tell one's secret, it's the desire to tell it and hide it at the same time. You've laid your cards on the table for 90 minutes. I'm not insinuating you haven't already answered this. What's it really all about for you?
Art making?
You can put in that context, definitely. Whatever context you want, yeah.
Or what it's all really about. I mean, I think it's all, for me, it's about play. I mean, I think I want, if I didn't have filmmaking, I would need some other form of playful activity. I think play is really, serious, and it taps us into, games tap us into a lot, or even if it's ourselves or others. And yeah, I think it's both like really serious and not somehow. So I think for me, it's all about, play.
Yeah, Zappa.
What can be revealed, both confessionally or not so much, about the world we live in or share. Things like that.
Beautiful. Zappa said, I'm very serious about being not serious. But this idea of play, I mean, I think it's rooted in your early ambitions to being a musician. You don't work a music, you play music. You know, that's why Walter Pater said, all art aspires to the condition of music. Like all painting, literature, everything wishes it can be as cool as music.
This is true. Yeah, and one of the things I often feel envious of, or enamored of, or moved by it with music is its liveness, something that it feels like cinema is often missing out on.
Yep, totally agree. What gives you the most optimism?
I think just other people.
Yeah. Amazing. The first question is, what's the best thing for a human being? Wilhelm Reich said the best thing for a human being is another person. Another person. At the end of his life, the last question is the question they asked Groucho Marx at the end of his life, and says, what gives you the most optimism? And he says, other people. So it's sure been spending this time with you, Ben, has been very nice. I really appreciate your time and energy. Truly been enlightening. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Jerry. These are really special questions, and it's been a real treat being able to, wrestle with them.
Yeah. Even though I'm going to hit the end broadcast button, I hope this never ends and we can keep talking forever and ever, man. Thank you so much.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much.